All right, test, check 1, 2. How is it sounding? That sounds all right. All right, let's turn this thing on. All right, cool. Here we are. It looks like everything's working. It seems like everything's working. Great. Welcome to the brand new stream time. We are moving the stream from Tuesdays to Mondays and bumping it up an hour to 3 p.m. where I live, and I'm not sure what time it is wherever you live. But yeah, we're switching things up a little bit in the channel, and this is going to be the first week of me kind of playing on stream times, video release dates, doing some stuff on Patreon, getting, just updating in general what the channel is doing and what it's about. So I appreciate anybody who's here for popping by, and yeah, we're gonna kind of do what we normally do on Tuesdays, which is just the kind of open format Ableton office hours, and just you guys are welcome to come by, ask me any questions you have about making music with Ableton Live, and sometimes for these streams I have things planned out. Like today, I want to talk a little bit about latency and things you can do to reduce your latency. And one thing specifically you can do to reduce latency. And other than that, you guys are more than welcome to ask me questions about anything related to music production with Ableton Live. Before I dive into that, I do want to let you know part of how and why we're changing the stream schedule is that I'm going to be a little bit more active with Patreon and doing a lot of the same content, pretty much all the same content that I have been making for the channel already, which is going to be 2 streams a week plus a video. And then there's going to be extra bonus content for people who are supporting me on Patreon, including an extra stream tomorrow afternoon at the same time, where I'll be going through just production kind of stuff. And you're more than welcome to join me that and support me on Patreon or whatever. So anything else I need to mention? I think that's it. I think that's kind of the things I wanted to do to get started. So latency is a major issue that I see a lot of people running into. People ask me all the time, and sometimes it's a very minor issue, and sometimes it just prevents you from getting anything done at all when you're recording. So there are a couple ways to deal with latency to reduce your latency when you're recording, and there's a couple kind of like weird, sneaky things about latency. There's a few little things if you are aware of, can totally change the game if you are struggling to get rid of that last little tiny bit of latency. So the example I'm going to give you guys today is going to be, I'm using my modular synthesizer, which you can't see in the camera. I wish I had another camera set up so you could see it, but it's set up right here. And it's just going to be sending out quarter note, beefy kick drums, like square wave kick drums. And the way I'm doing this is I'm using the CV clock out here. This is basically sending a signal out of live into my hardware so that when I hit play, it'll start the sequencer on my hardware and it'll keep the tempo of whatever live is doing. So we can test this out by first hitting play here. And we can see this is sending out a signal. And I can see my hardware is moving and doing stuff. And we can see coming in here on this channel, we got a signal. And if we record enable it, there it is. So that's all I'm really doing. I'm just sending tempo information out to my hardware. The hardware is sequencing those kicks, and then the audio is being sent back into live. There's no MIDI involved in here. It's just CV and audio. But if I were to, for example, like change the tempo, it's going to stay in time with live, which is really cool. Like that. And if I want to tweak the sound, I can do so on my hardware. Let's turn that like that. So that's all we're doing is just setting out a signal there. And the issue that you may be running into, whether you're recording from your hardware gear or from a microphone or your guitar or whatever, is latency, which essentially means that you will be playing things on time with the beat of your session, of your song. What's up, Daniel? How are you doing today? So be playing things on time, but it takes a certain amount of time for the audio to get from whatever the source is, your microphone or whatever, into your audio interface and into live. And that amount of time is called latency. And so you could be playing things right on time, right when you want to be, but all your recordings will be delayed by a little tiny bit of time. This could be a couple of milliseconds. This could be 10 or 15 milliseconds. This could be 30 milliseconds, depending on your gear and how you have the software set up. And generally, I've found that when you're recording audio, you want under like 15 milliseconds. Anything above 15 milliseconds is really not going to work for you. You're going to notice it's going to sound off and it's going to sound weird. So ideally, you want to get your latency under 15 milliseconds. And the first thing you're going to do when you're checking your latency is go to your preferences, your audio preferences, Command comma or Control comma for you guys. And in here, we have our latency right here. So live knows and can detect how much latency there is. And so it's telling me that I have an input latency of about 6 milliseconds and an output latency of about 5 milliseconds. But both around 5.5, almost 6. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty small amount of time. You're not going to really notice 5 milliseconds. If we can get it less than that, great. But 5 will do. We can also change this by changing the buffer size. And this is one of the most important settings in all of Live. And a lot of people just don't understand how this works. So the way the buffer size works is that a smaller number in your buffer size means you're going to get less latency. So if I switch this down to 32 samples, I now have 3.9 milliseconds and 4.3. So essentially 4 milliseconds of latency, which is pretty small. That's actually really small. However, the big issue with buffer size is that the smaller the buffer size, and therefore the smaller the latency, the more intense it is on your computer's processing power. So the CPU meter, which is directly behind my head right now, will jump up to higher numbers much faster. So if you're running into CPU issues, if your computer is struggling to handle your sessions, this should be one of the very first things you check. Because when you're recording, you want this number to be essentially as low as your computer can handle it. Because if it's too low, your computer will just freak out and it just can't do it. However, if we jump down to say 1024, you're going to get much larger amounts of latency, but it's much easier on your computer. Which means the general rule of thumb here is when you are recording, you want this number as low as your computer can handle it. When you are not recording, you can keep this down here at these higher numbers and it saves you tons and tons of CPU. So whether you're running into latency issues or you're running into CPU issues, this is a really important control just to know about and just to kind of understand how it works. So that's the first thing you should check anytime you're dealing with latency. Just turn this down, and that should pretty dramatically increase or decrease your latency. So we're going to actually test this out. We're going to do a few experiments here. And I've done these experiments before. I was doing this a couple weeks ago just for fun, just to kind of see what I could do with my latency, because that's what I do in my free time. And I kind of know what numbers I'm looking for. However, I did not try it on stream before. So I'm a little curious, this will be a bit of an experiment, whether me live streaming this, which does take up a lot of my computer's processing power, is going to it's going to mess with my latency. And we'll see. It might do nothing. It might affect it a whole lot. So Daniel, when I'm not recording, so when I'm mixing, I'm not recording, you can keep your buffer size as high as you want it, meaning larger numbers, meaning more latency. So if you are not actively putting audio into your computer, you can keep this at a super high number. And like when you're mixing, I'll keep it at 1024, 2048, depending on what's going on and how much CPU I'm taking up. But this does not negatively impact your ability to hear what's going on in time. This is essentially this only really matters essentially for audio coming into your computer. If that makes sense. All right, so we're going to try it with a 128 sample buffer size, which gives me about 6 milliseconds of latency and 6 milliseconds coming out. And we're just going to kind of experiment and see what happens. Yeah, Ryan, so the driver compensation is one of the things we're going to get into. It's going to be a little bit down the road, so if you're patient, bear with me and we'll get there eventually. But that's something that I've done some research into, and there's a very specific way to make that work. All right, so experiment time. Hey, Matt, how are you doing? So we're going to just hit record here. I'm gonna record a couple of kick drums, and these are all in quarter notes, so they should be starting pretty close to a quarter note. One other thing I would like to point out is in my experimentations, sometimes it randomly gets a little bit more latency than other times. So I'm just gonna maybe record a couple just to kind of see where we're at with it. So I'm just gonna hit record. There's our kick drums, and we can go in here and we can see this is where our kick drum is supposed to be. And this is actually where that waveform is starting, right? So what we can do is I'm going to turn the grid off, and I'm just going to measure from here to here. And down here in the corner, right where my mouse is right now, it's going to tell me the length in time that I have selected. And it's giving me about 14 milliseconds of latency, which is okay. It's workable. You can work with that. That's totally fine. However, I would like to get this less than this. And I experimented with lots of different methods for getting rid of this 14 milliseconds latency. And there's only one method that I could find that actually does it. But usually I'm finding when my buffer size is sitting in this kind of area, I'm sitting at 13, 14 milliseconds of latency, which like I said, it's okay. It's workable. You can work with that. But we want to reduce this a little bit. But just to kind of prove my point about the buffer size and the latency is if I go up to, say, 1024, and I do the exact same thing, let's check out and see how much latency I have. So just looking right here, we can see it already looks like it's a lot more. And if I measure from here to here, this is significantly off. This is not acceptable. You cannot work with like this. It'll drive you crazy. And I've got 64 milliseconds of latency, which is, like I said, it's too much. So if you're noticing big chunks of latency like this, the first thing you should explore here is going to be the buffer size and making sure you're sitting at a low buffer size. However, what I also found, it's funny, it's like it sends a little bit of signal out whenever I change my buffer size. Even if I went down to the absolute lowest setting here, if I would go down to 32 samples, which gives me about 4 milliseconds of input latency, I could not get underneath 13 milliseconds latency. So let's try this out with the lowest setting here and see what the minimum I can get is. So just hopping in here. This one actually has 21 milliseconds latency. So weirdly enough, it actually got more latency here than I did when I was at 128. So try it for yourself. Try experimenting. This is why we're doing these kind of things. It's mostly just kind of like see are things working the way they're supposed to, and what can we do to change those or improve those? So getting underneath 13 milliseconds of latency was actually kind of tricky here. So a lot of people will try to play around with things like the track delay right here. Theoretically, this track delay will basically move a signal coming into your track back a little bit or move it forward a little bit in time. So the way this should work, and when I experimented with this, it did not work the way I thought it was going to. It did not behave the way I thought it would. So we're going to try this out again. And thus far, everything's working exactly the same as it did when I wasn't streaming. So that's good in terms of timing. But yeah, CPU overload will definitely screw with your latency, Daniel. So the more things you have going in the background, the more softwares you have up and running, the harder it is on your computer, which might screw around with your latency a little bit. So we're going to try giving a little bit of track delay, and we'll try turning it up first just to kind of see how that works. Actually, we'll do one recording with no track delay, and then we'll turn it up, and then we'll turn it down and see what happens. So here it is at 128 again. It should be about 14 milliseconds of latency. Going in here, that looks like, yeah, 14 milliseconds latency. So if we try turning the track delay here, and let's give it another 26 milliseconds of track delay, and let's see what happens. So in here, now it's at 25 milliseconds of latency, which is strange to me because we have this set to about 25 milliseconds of latency. So that number didn't add up to me. It didn't quite make sense. It's definitely doing the thing it's supposed to. It's definitely delaying that signal, but it's not a combination of the 14 milliseconds plus another 26. It's just 26, it looks like. So I thought that was strange. We're gonna try the same thing. Oops. We're gonna try the same thing going the other direction and seeing what happens. Also did not help us. Wait, turn this in here. We're getting about 53 milliseconds of latency. So it did the opposite of what I thought it was going to do. I thought this was going to move it further up in time, but it actually moved it farther back. So track delay here, I may be missing something. I've read the manual pretty thoroughly about how this works, and it is not working the way I want it, at least in this particular setup. So track delay, I've talked to people who have used it to great effect and have used it to kind of counteract some of their latency, and it's just not been working for me. And the other thing people will like to talk about, which somebody mentioned in chat, is up in the options here. We have delay compensation and we have reduce latency when monitoring. The delay compensation is the solution that actually worked for me, but there's a very specific reason why it worked for me. The reduce latency when monitoring, I did not get a lot of good results from this, but we're going to try this one first before we get to the actual final solution that fixed everything for me. So we're going to turn on reduce latency while monitoring. We are monitoring here. So our monitor is set to auto or in. We'll try both and see if there's any difference here. So we're going to try this out and see what happens. Did not really change anything. Did not get us below our 14 milliseconds. In fact, we're at 25 right now. This might be a mistake. Let's try it one more and see if it, sometimes, like I said, it gets random results. There we go. See, this one actually looks a little shorter here. Yeah, it's back to 14. So reduced latency while monitoring did not really get us any closer to where we're going. I also wanted to test this out using different monitor settings. We have monitor in, monitor auto, and monitor off. Just to try it out to see if that makes any difference, we're going to try monitor in. And once again, that did not get us below 14. I'll try one more time. Yeah, it actually moved us up to 25. However, let's go ahead and turn our reduce latency on monitoring. However, when you switch your monitor from either in or auto to off, this is the only monitoring mode. This is the only monitoring mode where the delay compensation works. As far as I know, as far as all the experiments and all the research and all the YouTube videos I watched in the last couple of weeks trying to figure all this stuff out, this delay compensation only works when you're using monitor off. Which means when I'm using monitor off and now I start recording audio to this track, look at that timing. That is extremely close to being on time. It's basically on time. I don't think you can really ask for anything closer to that. We're looking at about 1, maybe 2 milliseconds of latency. That's it. That was the solution. The issue with the monitor being set to off is that you cannot hear it while you're recording. As you noticed, like I can hear it now. I hit play, but when I hit record, it's not sending that audio to my headphones or to my speakers. However, I'm getting really, really tight, essentially no latency recordings. That one actually got a little bit of latency. Let's try it one more time. Like I said, sometimes it just freaks out and doesn't like it. Of course, now that, let's see, it's timing here. It's 11 milliseconds. Most of the time, this works great. Of course, when I'm streaming is the time that it stops working. There we go. That looks basically perfect. We can't hear it while it's playing, but if I hit play to loop it, there we go. We got a nice, really tight, essentially latency, no latency recording there. So that was the solution that I found that works really well. It's a little bit obnoxious because I cannot actually hear it while I'm recording. Most of the time, especially when I'm doing something like this, I don't need to hear it while I'm recording. I can just listen to it doing its thing. And then when I'm ready to start recording, I just switch this to off, hit the record button, and then boom, there it works. Bishop, are you talking about the track delay here and using this to compensate things? I demonstrated this a little bit earlier, and I have not been happy with my results with it yet. I'm assuming that, yeah, so I talked about this a little earlier. Like I said, I experimented with it, and yeah, no worries. Was not impressed. But I've also talked to people who said that this fixed their problem. So this might be your mileage may vary a little bit depending on your setup. But for my setup and the kind of recording I'm doing, which is quantize things coming out of a piece of hardware into live that is tempo synced with live, this worked great for me. So just set the monitor off, hit the record button, and then boom, you're good to go. The other thing that was kind of interesting, and I want to do another test here, is now that we have the monitor set to off, I want to play around with our buffer size latency and kind of see how close we can get or how far away it can get. So Matt, as far as I'm aware, and again, like a lot of this stuff, like I'm trying to figure this out as well because it's fairly complicated and a lot of the terminology is a little weird. As far as I can tell, the delay compensation control here, it's not that monitoring causes latency, it's that the delay compensation setting in live right here only works when the monitor is set to off. That's my understanding of it. But they don't tell you that right off the bat. It doesn't say like, put it in monitor off in order to make this work. This straight up doesn't do anything in monitor in and auto. And I'm not entirely sure why. It's something I really hope that they fix and change or update. But that is my understanding of the situation. So just to do some more experiments, we're going to bump up to a pretty decent amount of latency here and record with monitor off just to kind of see where we get with it. And we might do a couple of them just to make sure we get a consistent number. So there's one, which is a little bit off, not too bad. It's 13 milliseconds of latency, which is not nearly as bad as it was before. And let's do one more just for good measure. There we go. That one's right on. This is really fascinating to me. I hadn't tried this test before. So even though we have tons of latency coming in because our buffer size is really high, if we're set to monitor off and we have our delay compensation turned on, it automatically does it for you. You don't need to worry about it. This is actually really fantastic. So if you are running into CPU issues while you're recording, that makes a big difference. All right, so Bishop was asking, you have your sample size set so low, it makes the audio unlistenable. So you're going back and forth between the sample rate and buffer after recording. So the way this works, I kind of covered this a little bit at the beginning, but I think you missed it, Martin. The smaller the buffer size, the less latency you're getting, but the more CPU processing that's happening. Right, so this is more intense on your computer's processor. whereas this is less intense on your computer's processor. So the general rule of thumb here is when you're recording, you want to keep this nice and low so you get less latency. When you're not recording, you just keep this set nice and high. So you don't need to switch this back and forth all the time. It's either you're recording, you keep it pretty low, or you're not recording and you keep it pretty high. But you shouldn't need to like play with sample rate at all. You can just leave your sample rate whatever you want. Because I guess I'm not quite sure what you mean by like adjusting your sample rate and it being unlistenable. But now that I've tested this out with monitor set to off and gotten basically zero latency here, it doesn't happen all the time now, and I'm not sure why. There we go. I think it's a CPU thing. I think sometimes my CPU gets a little choked up and then it has a little bit of latency, but this is essentially no latency here. And we're recording at 1024 samples. But yeah, that was my secret solution. It's not really a secret. People are starting to become more aware of this. I've seen a lot of people just kind of upset about latency in live and struggling to deal with it. And I experimented with a bunch of different techniques and I tried every piece of advice I could get, and keeping the delay compensation turned on while set to monitor off was the only thing that just like fixed everything all at once. I'm definitely going to play around a little bit more with the reduced latency when monitoring and see if I can get this to do more. It didn't really do anything no matter what I tried here. And then same thing with the track delay, trying to get the track delay so that it's set in a way that it fixes any latency that I might have. But yeah, that was my solution for latency. It's generally not a huge issue. If you're only getting, like I said, a couple milliseconds latency and you're recording like vocals or guitar or something like that, nobody's going to notice. We're talking about like fractions of a second here. However, if you can hear it, if you can like snap and then you see the recording happen later and you hear the recording happen later, that can really screw your whole performance up and make the whole thing sound terrible. So you don't necessarily need zero latency, but you want it as low as you can get without it crashing your computer and things like that. And for something like me, where I have this setup here where it's all quantized, if I'm recording something, these are all synthesizer hits, and I want them to be pretty on time, this was the solution that worked for me the best. So Martin, if you are on a Mac, it only lets you do, actually this might be determined by your audio interface. Some audio interfaces will let you just go whatever number you want, and some of them will just be these kind of like binary integers. Usually, if I'm just chilling, not doing any recording, 1024 is totally fine. And then when I'm recording, I set this basically as low as my computer can handle it, which is usually like 64 or so. If I have a really big session here, I might go down to like 128 or 256. But when I'm not recording, 1024 is usually kind of where I'll kind of set it and forget it. Yeah, so a lot of these numbers might be determined by your audio interface. So depending on what you have plugged in there, it might change everything about which samples you can set in your buffer size. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel on latency, at least a couple of the techniques that I've been trying out recently to reduce it. But try it out for yourself and let me know how it goes. I think that there's, I've been watching a bunch of videos on it too, as well as other people's techniques. And some people are like, this is the thing that worked for me. And then I tried the exact same thing and it did not work at all. So I think it's going to vary a lot depending on your computer setup, on your interface setup, what kind of gear you have, all that kind of stuff could actually make a pretty big difference in terms of which solution is the right one for you. But these are all things that I tried out. If anybody's got any questions about latency, let me know. Also, just like to point out that if you guys have any questions about anything related to music production, now's the time. Just toss it in chat. We can talk about it. Yeah, I've seen a bunch of people just be like, I just literally just quit live and I open up Logic and I record in Logic and then I bounced it out and I brought it back into live, which is sad. I think it's the kind of thing that Ableton can handle. They're a big enough company and they are smart enough to figure out a way to have delay compensation while you can also hear your recording. That would be just great. But until then, like I said, this solution, just switching it to off, works pretty awesome. Yeah, try switching your monitor to off, record it, see where that gets you. Because this was like basically the magic solution. It fixed all my problems in essentially one button. And in terms of like the difference between auto and in, they were basically the same in almost all of my experiments in terms of latency and things like that. But the off is where the magic happens. Yeah, we can talk about harsh vocal chains in a little bit. That's definitely something that like I recorded a bunch of vocals like that when I was younger, but I didn't have like a processing chain back then. So here's the other experiment I wanted to try out. So I was thinking about solutions where like, what if I actually want to be able to monitor what I'm playing? What I want to try doing here, and I have not tested this out yet, is having two separate tracks like this. This is going to be your recording track that's set to off. This one is going to be set to in, and so it's just going to be passing the audio through it. So what I'm going to do in this situation is hit record here. This will be recording, hopefully with no latency. This will be just sending the audio through so we can hear it. Not sure if this is going to work or not, but we'll try it out. Boom, that works. Perfect. Great. So here's the solution. If you want to be able to monitor yourself and record with no latency, you have one audio track, monitor set to off, record enabled. That's where you do recording. And this works the same for session or range of view. You can do it in a range of view if that's how you feel more comfortable with it. The other track here is just an empty audio track. You can put whatever effects you want on it. You set them both to be the same input. They're both coming from, this is just input 2 of my interface, which is what my synth is plugged into. This one is set to monitor in. Monitor in is always looking for an input, regardless of whether you're recording it or not. So now if I hit play, it's going to send the signal here, record it with 0 latency, and then it's also going to send it here and then send it to your headphones. That's probably going to be the best option. I tried a few other kind of variations on this when I was testing this out last week, and this worked better than anything else I tried, basically. So one more time, this audio track set to off, record enabled, this audio track set to in, record right here. And now if I want to like tweak something, there's all my recordings, essentially 0 latency. Oh, this one had a little bit on it. Let's check this real quick. This one had a little latency. So you still need to watch out for it. Sometimes it still has a little bit of latency, but most of the time it doesn't. See, that one had a little bit. Oh, we got it to work that one time. See, this is the other big issue here. if you can get 0 latency, but only some of the time, then it's not that useful. So I'm trying to figure out, I think it's got to be a CPU thing. I think it just, if my computer's doing too many things in the background, sometimes it just goes back and like we're not getting the delay compensation. But sometimes, nope, that's not good. The very first time it worked perfectly. All right, what if we do this? What if it's already playing? That's still got a little bit of latency. 12 milliseconds of latency there. All right, well, when I'm not on stream, it works 80% of the time. And when I am on stream, of course, it works 20% of the time. But yeah, this is what I try out. This is what I'm gonna be using for my modular Ableton Live integrated setup. That way I can record stuff, keep it on time, no latency, and hopefully no latency, and get everything together. And then I'd probably just take both of these guys, put them in a group, and that way if I want to put some like effects on it, say I want to do some like weird little delay thing here. They'll both be just running through the group, and that way if I'm recording live, this is going to the group and gets the delay on it. And if I'm playing the recorded version, it's going through the group. And then if I just play this version, we'll have to mute this guy. We still get it there. Yeah, I don't know if it's the stream that's affecting it. It's like this weird number. It's like 13 milliseconds is the number that my system wants to have for latency. And that was the thing that like took me a while to get around. But yeah, this is more or less what the inputs for my hardware setup will be for recording and looping and playing hardware stuff and syncing all with live. All right, and then Martin was asking a little bit about effects chains for harsh vocals. So I guess it depends a little bit on what you mean by harsh vocals. That can mean a lot of different things to different people. It could, like, are you talking like just industrial noise vocals? Are you talking just like hardcore punk vocals? Are you talking about like I may need a reference or something to kind of go off. But off the top of my head, it would probably be probably just like the faintest amount of distortion. Because too much distortion will just like take over everything. You won't be hearing anything at all, unless that's what you're going for. What's up, Nericol? How you doing? Let's actually, what's going to be a way to test this out? I guess I'll have to just send my live vocals to this. Will be a little bit of an experiment here as well. I'm going to switch off of my, let's turn all this stuff off. I'm going to switch off my hardware interface and go to my, oh, that's not going to work. It's going to be too quiet. I really need to get just like a bunch of vocal samples to use for references, because I never use vocal samples in a lot of my productions. Let's just check out. That's not helpful. All right, this is going to be our start for our harsh vocals. All right, so say we want to take something like this and we want to make it harsh. And again, Bishop, or Martin, I want to be just kind of guessing in terms of stylistically what you want to go for here. But most likely, a little bit of distortion. It depends. The different kinds of distortion in live, understanding which distortion is good at what is actually really helpful for making really kind of harsh, abrasive music. because like, for example, the erosion is going to add this very kind of like faint little bit of white noise crispiness on top of what's happening. Whereas something like the pedal or overdrive are going to be more like crunchier kinds of distortion. And whereas like the dynamic tube is also going to get you something different. So like it really kind of depends on, you know, aesthetically which kind of distortion you want, and what's the end desired result. What are you going for? Yeah, erosion is like a secret weapon. It's not that secret, but it's a fantastic tool for just like adding a little crispiness to anything. So let's try that. This is probably not what I would go with really for a vocal, but it could be kind of cool. So there's 3 different settings here. We got noise, wide noise, and sine. Sine's probably not going to be what you want for a vocal. It's going to add this kind of like tonal crispiness to it. It makes it sound kind of like a bit crusher downsampler kind of thing, which probably not your thing. The noise and the wide noise is kind of misleading here. The wide noise, or sorry, the noise is just going to add like a little bit of like a noise oscillator that's going to be triggered by the volume being sent through it. And we can kind of like adjust the frequency and the volume of that noise oscillator here. So you can kind of like position it wherever you want. And we can change the width here. But a little bit of that on something can really kind of add, like just make it sound crunchier. I don't know if crunchy is the right word. Just like adds this little bit of like sizzle on top. Now, the wide noise is a little bit misleading here because there's a width control right here, which you can see controls the width of the filter. The width has nothing to do with wide noise. The only difference between noise and wide noise is that this is a mono noise generator and this is a stereo noise generator. So you get different noise generators on your left and right side. They sound very, very similar though. So you're not going to hear much difference between the two of them. But that's kind of it. That's really what it does. So it can sound really good on a lot of things, but you generally, generally it's like that, just a nice little subtle bit on top. I don't know if it's a ring noise. I honestly have not looked into what's generating the noise. The sine wave sounds like that. The noise ones I think are just noise generators. The sine probably, yeah, that makes sense to me. But I have not looked into what's actually causing that kind of weird little distortion there. Most likely for vocals, pedal and amp, which are both amazing distortions, they're gonna be too much. They're just like gonna like way too, like they're gonna take over the sound. And it's just gonna be too much unless you're, again, unless you're going for something really over the top. Could work, but those are not gonna be my go-tos. However, overdrive, I think, would be really great for harsh vocals. This would probably be between overdrive and erosion, between those two, or maybe a combination of those two. That's probably what I would lean towards. That's like the first place I would check to do like a harsh vocal chain. Once again, though, we're gonna have to keep our dry wet pretty low. And just give it like that little bit extra tone, maybe turn up the drive a little bit. And that might be a great way to like add a little bit of that kind of like more crunchier distortion onto a vocal chain. What's up, Isaac? How are you doing today? So yeah, so maybe overdrive first, and then maybe a little bit of erosion. And maybe on like the wide noise. And again, all of the amounts here depend a lot on how over the top you want to be with it. If you want to be subtle, keep these nice and low. If you want to give her something like really out there, something like that. Hey, Marcus, how are you? That's a fantastic question. the dynamics control is going to have a built-in compressor inside the overdrive, and I always forget which direction is which. I'm pretty sure if you turn, we'll have to try this out. But if you turn it down, I think it's going to be less compression, and as you turn it up, it's going to be more compression, but it might be the opposite way. But let's resample this and try this out. So we're going to come out of this track into this track. We'll just record this here, and I'm going to start with it really dynamics really low, and then we're going to go up. Yeah, so it looks like the lower number on the dynamics here is going to be, what was it? That looks like more compression. So more compression as you turn it down, and then less compression as you turn it up, which makes sense. So more dynamics as it's up, and then less as it's down. Yeah, so it's like a little built-in compressor. I wouldn't, if you're gonna be doing any kind of like major amounts of compression, then I probably would just use a regular compressor. You're gonna get a lot more control there, but it's a kind of fun little control. Yeah, and then Marcus has mentioned saturator on vocals. Absolutely, saturator on literally everything. Not literally everything, but figuratively everything. In fact, again, if you're gonna go for more kind of subtle vocals, you just want to bring them out a little bit. Turn up the drive a little bit. I've talked about saturator, I think, before on stream and in videos, but my go-tos for the saturator are going to be the soft sine or the cyanide fold if you're going to be doing something a little bit more subtle. Medium curve if you really want to like grid it up a little bit. And then if you just want to go straight up over the top, really in your face, crazy distortion, go hard. Those are kind of the options. Analog clip doesn't do that much in my opinion. Digital clip sounds very digital, which is usually not what I'm going for. And then wave shaper, you have to do all these like other settings in here to like make that sound cool, which is too much work. So soft sine, medium fold, which at low settings sound exactly the same. That and that are going to sound exactly the same. The only time you'll ever notice the difference between soft sine and cyanide fold is if you like crank up the drive like a super huge amount, which usually I don't recommend doing. But yeah, for a little vocal like this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Turn that down a little bit. I mean, Daniel, that would literally be the entire video. I'd just be like, I'd just load up saturator. I would take a sine wave, run it through the saturator, and be like, just do this all the time. This thing is like, it's so good. And if you really want to push it, you can turn on the soft clip and just crank it through it. And then you can like really hear all that distortion in there. So yeah, so in terms of distortion, these would probably be the three I would go to for like a vocal thing. And then of course, I would also want to have an EQ8 on there, get rid of any of this stuff down here without getting too much into mixing. But when you see like this spike in volume right here, that is the fundamental. That is the lowest important frequency to this sound. Everything else down here, completely useless. Don't want it, don't need it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cut out anything below that fundamental right there. Yeah, so the color settings down here, these four down here, these are actually really, really strange. These are basically two different filters that are very strangely shaped, and this controls one filter, and then the other three controls control a separate filter that's after the first filter. But they can, yeah, I tend to use them more on bass sound design, although honestly, I don't really use them a whole lot anymore. Marcus, what do you mean bit rate changing? You're talking about bit depth? Because bit rate and bit depth are different. Or sample rates, bit depth, and bit rate are all different things. But bit rate is usually not going to be super relevant for this kind of stuff. Yeah, so I'd have a little filter like this, probably a compressor. So bit depth is a really fantastically complicated conversation that we can definitely have right now. If you guys are into it. If you want to get real nerdy, we can talk about bit depth. Yeah, so I have a compressor just to kind of round out this little vocal chain, and then maybe a little bit of reverb. Just a little hybrid reverb before my EQ. And then just tweak the hybrid reverb and keep it a little nice and subtle. What about the EQ8 makes your head hurt, Isaac? But Martin, I don't know if you're still around, but this is kind of what I would look at as like a starting point for a vocal chain for some kind of like harsher vocals. That way there's plenty of stuff to grid them up. If I wanted to go beyond this, maybe a little bit of chorus could be kind of fun. Yeah, those would be the main effects that I would just get started using it. Isaac, we can definitely talk a little bit about EQ8 and when and where and why and how to use it, because it has a lot of different functions and a lot of people use it in different ways. Some of those ways are good and some of them are not, but yeah, let me know if you have anything more specific than that, and we can definitely talk about that. But I want to talk about bit depth. So there's no way to get into this without getting really nerdy. So I hope you guys are ready and prepared to nerd out about audio and waveforms. So there are two primary controls that are controlling the audio quality of anything you're recording into live. There's going to be sample rate, and then over in your record warp launch tab, there's going to be bit depth. Now, the way these work essentially is that if we, yeah, I'm definitely gonna get super nerdy, Daniel, but thanks for popping by. Also, just to let you guys know, if anybody here, I think a couple people here may or may not be Patreon members. The first Patreon only stream is happening tomorrow at the exact same time. And I haven't done it before, so it's gonna be a bit of an experiment, and we're gonna make sure all that stuff works. So if anybody is gonna be around for that, I will see you tomorrow. All right, but we're talking about audio here. We're talking about waveforms. This right here, this is not actually a waveform. This is a graph that depicts a waveform. This is just the actual shape of the way sound waves move through space. This itself, though, is just ones and zeros. This is just binary code. And so when we're looking at something like this, we essentially have a graph where we have time on our x-axis going left and right, and we have volume on our y-axis going up and down. Right? That's essentially what's going on here. And essentially this middle gray line here is no volume, and it gets louder as it gets out here, and then quieter as it gets closer, and then louder again as it gets down here. Sample rate is how often you measure in time. So it's basically the resolution of our x-axis. And one of the cool things about live is if you zoom in far enough into an audio file, you're going to see a bunch of dots. Because while this may look like a line, this is not actually a line. This is a series of discrete points. It's a bunch of dots that are connected together to make what resembles a line. So if you zoom in far enough here, you can see the space from here to here is one sample. Generally, when you're working with audio, there are 44,100 samples per second. So that's what this number is here. 44.1 being standard, 48K, 88.2, 96K. We can talk about sample rates more if you want, but just to give you a better understanding, so when we talk about bit depth, it makes more sense. So sample rate, how often you measure in time. Yeah, it's all just wiggly air. Bit depth is the resolution of your volumes. And this is actually really important because sample rate is a set exact number. When you are measuring samples, you're getting exactly 44,100 samples per second, if that's your sample rate. Whereas bit depth is how many possible volumes you can measure at. So if we take a look in here, we have three options. We got 16-bit, we got 24-bit, and we got 32-bit. This is not 16 different volumes you can measure at. And this is not 24 different volumes you can measure at. This is 2 to the 16th power, which, if memory serves, is about 65,000 different possible volumes you can measure at, which is pretty good. So 16-bit sounds decent. 16-bit is essentially like CD quality. So if you've ever listened to a CD, nobody listens to CDs anymore, but it's that audio quality, which is 65,000 roughly. 24-bit is going to be 2 to the 24th power, which is, if I'm not mistaken, 15 million, 16 million, somewhere in that range. So you're going from 65,000 to 15 million different volumes that you could possibly measure at. So when you're looking at these little dots here, essentially from, I believe it's all the way up and down. So it's like from here to here is 15 million different places that that dot can be for your volume, which is much better. So what this means is if you are listening on earbuds or something like that, 24-bit and 16-bit, you're not going to notice much difference. They're going to sound exactly the same. Or like laptop speakers, for example, you're not going to hear any difference. However, if you are listening on decent quality headphones or decent quality speakers, you can hear a difference between 16-bit and 24-bit. It's just going to have more accuracy to the volumes everything's supposed to be. It's just going to sound better. And if you're paying attention, you can notice that difference. However, when you go to a larger bit depth, same thing for larger sample rates, it's going to be a larger file size because there's more information in that audio file. So going from 16-bit to 24-bit, it's pretty significantly different in file size. However, it's generally accepted that it's worth it to go up that because you can notice a difference in volumes between 16-bit and 24-bit. You can notice a difference in quality between those two. So generally, when people are working in audio these days, they're recording at 24-bit. Keep in mind, you can always go from a higher bit depth to a lower bit depth. That's always an option. However, it's impossible to go from a lower bit depth to a higher bit depth. I mean, it's possible, but it's not going to change anything. So if you record at 16-bit and you're like, oh man, I wish this sounded better, you can't convert it up to 24 and make it sound better. But if you record at 24-bit and you're like, oh, you know what? I don't need this file to be this big. I can just bounce it out at 16-bit. That's always an option. 32-bit is going to be 2 to the 32nd power, which again, if I'm not mistaken, is like 4 billion. However, our resolution at 24-bit is already so good that generally it's pretty hard to hear a difference between 32-bit and 24-bit. And once again, it's going to be a much larger file size. So most people end up not working at 32-bit because it's going to take longer to load. It takes up more space on your hard drive. It's just more of a pain to deal with. So for the most part, I recommend staying away from 32-bit. However, one of the cool things about 32-bit is you can actually clip. You can go above 0 dB and it does not affect your audio. So if you're one of those people who really likes just kind of like riding that line and just like really pushing it to the limit, and you want to do your sound design and you want everything to be like plus 15 decibels and you want it to not clip, All right. This should be back working now, hopefully. Okay, cool. Sweet, yeah, that happens sometimes. Apologize about that. What's up, After Party? How you doing? So yeah, last thing you guys heard was with 32-bit, you can clip. That's basically it. So if you want to do some really crazy sound design where you take a piece of audio and you turn it up by like 70 decibels and then resample it and then turn it by another 70 decibels, you can like create really weird artifacts and glitches and then listen to it and it's not clipping. But if you are not doing any crazy experimentation with volumes and going above 0 dB, I generally don't recommend recording at 32-bit. It's just a larger file size for what is arguably not much increase in audio quality. So for me, 24 is kind of the magic number. But if you want to experiment and do some fun things with 32-bit, I would encourage you guys to try it out because it's kind of interesting. It kind of like, it breaks a lot of the rules for audio when you're at 32-bit. However, another thing just to be aware of is that if you have like an audio clip like this, we can see down here, this is a 24-bit. So when I'm playing this, it's coming out and we're basically hearing it at 24-bit. However, all of the audio channels in live are at 32-bit. So if you're like playing a synthesizer, if you're playing the wavetable or something like that, and you're just playing stuff, it's coming out at 32-bit, which is kind of cool. But yeah, that's kind of the basics of bit depth. Hopefully that makes sense. 16, CD quality, 24, better than CD quality, and 32 is like usually not super useful, but you can try it if you want. Does that make sense? I don't remember who I originally asked that question, but yeah, that's kind of the deal there. And as I kind of mentioned a little earlier, sample rate's kind of the same idea. 4041 is going to be CD quality, and you can go up from there. 48K is going to be essentially audio for video. And then you can like double those numbers, and then depending on your interface and your setup, you can double it again up to like 192, and you can keep going. Generally, with sample rates, the higher you go, if you went up to like from 44.1 to 88.2, it's going to be double the file size because you have twice as many of these little dots right here. So there'd be a dot right there, and there'd be a dot right there, and there'd be a dot right there. You're also, as you go from 44.1 to 88.2, are not really getting a super noticeable increase in audio quality. There's a lot of audio files out there who will probably disagree with me about that. That's totally fine. If you can hear a difference, you can hear a difference. But you're getting much... Oh, you're asking about the reducing bit depth. Fantastic. Well, that kind of leads me into back into talking about distortion. But yeah, sample rates, you can go higher if you want, but it's gonna be a larger file size for arguably not much better audio. So 44.1 or 48K are kind of gonna be your places to be. So you're asking specifically about the Redux, which allows you to decrease your bit depth. So Redux, I actually like a lot. I tend to use this more for synthesized sounds than I would on something like a vocal or something more natural sounding, because it has this very digital sounding distortion. So if we turn all these guys off and we were to say take the bit rate or the sample rate down, that's why you're calling it bit rate, because it says rate here and it says bits here. So this reduces your sample rate, which again, it has this very kind of digital, kind of low quality record audio sound to it. And then bit depth is going to reduce your bit depth, starting 16, going all the way down to 1 bit. So at 1 bit, you only have 2 possible volumes. Why does my hair always look crazy when I'm streaming? It's either maximum volume or it's nothing, because it's 1 to the 2nd power. So it's either all the way on or nothing. If you have a bit depth of 2, you have 4 different possible volumes it can be. And it's going to cause distortion as it jumps from one volume to the next. And I'm going to try this out real quick just so you can kind of see. So if I turn this down a little bit, the difference between 16 and 11 is like not that much. You can hear like a tiny bit of distortion there. But as you go lower, you can really hear it adding that kind of like white noise in there. And if I go down even farther, it gets really loud. And you can combine the two of them together. So you can make these really kind of cool, interesting distortions. Vertigo VSM3. I'll have to try that out. Emo. There's so many cool plugins that I'm like way behind on testing out. So yeah, this is how this relates to sample rate and bit depth. This is going to reduce your bit depth down from 40,000 samples per second down to 20 samples per second. And this is going to reduce your bit depth from 16 going down. Because generally, you're not going to be recording audio at 5 bits. That's not even an option in live. Yeah, it's not quite compression. It's weird. I think with the older Redux, you could see it easier on the volume meter here. You could actually see it like jump from one volume to the next. And here it looks like it smoothly jumps a little bit. I wonder if I change the shape at all. No, it's still kind of the same. Actually sounds really cool. I like that. But yeah, it's reducing the possible volumes you can measure at. It's pretty cool. Yeah, another kind of thing, if we're talking about like clipping distortion, is instead of using the regular compressor here, use the glue compressor, which has the built-in soft clip, which so does saturator. But this is one of my favorite ways to like grit things up a little bit, is use a little bit of glue compressor, turn the threshold down a little bit, turn the soft clip on, crank the makeup. And that way it just never clips coming out. YouTube's giving me trouble here. Let me make sure it doesn't screw with my audio. Still sound okay? Testing. That still works. Cool. Yeah, isotope trash is also an amazing distortion. The issue I've had with trash is that there's too many cool options. There's too many cool buttons to hit, and so I end up spending like all this time shaping and distorting and doing all this crazy stuff here. And one of the things I like about the live distortions, pretty much all of them, is like this one has like 8 controls. This one has like 3 controls. This one has like 4 that are actually relevant. This one has like 4 that are relevant. There's like, you can't spend a million hours tweaking your distortion like you can with trash, which is really, really nice because a big thing that I'm focusing on when I'm making my music is just momentum. You just got to like keep moving, right? So if I end up having to slow down to a snail's pace to like tweak all my distortion to a perfection, then I just like, it really slows me down. So having devices like this, they're like, it only has the basic things I need, means I can get the sound I want in like 30 seconds per device, as opposed to 20 minutes with trash. So that's one of the reasons I've really slimmed down a lot on a lot of my third-party plugins, because just the live devices are so quick and they're restrictive in terms of what you can do with it, but you can use that restriction to benefit your own workflow and your own kind of like ability to actually get things done. But yeah, these are all great options for harsh, distorted vocals that I'll take a look into. Just don't go too over top with all the distortion. So Afterpart is asking, can I sidechain compress an audio track using a dummy MIDI clip? You mean you want to use MIDI to trigger a sidechain? Yes, there's a couple ways you can do that off the top of my head. There are a number of third-party plugins, like sidechain plugins, that will just have a MIDI input. Do I have it on this computer? I don't think I've actually downloaded Keeper on this computer. No, I haven't downloaded it on this computer, but there's a number of third-party plugins that will just have a MIDI input. So you can just send MIDI out to the whatever compressor. But the way you would do it otherwise is probably just do like a ghost kick would be the easy way to do it. So what you would end up doing is just grab like a simpler and just put like a generic kick drum in there. Something like that. And then just mute it. You can even like turn the volume down here if you want. So that way you can basically like plug in whatever rhythm you want. And then as you hit play here, let me fix this situation. That should go to the master. So say I wanted a sidechain over here. This could just receive from your ghost kick track, and then just make sure you grab it not post mixer and grab it post effects. Oops, that's very loud. But you can see it's just the same way you do it. It's just you're doing it with a track that's essentially muted. So a lot of people do that. A lot of people just have that as part of their template where like, this is our ghost kick and it just lives there and it's turned off so you don't actually hear it. And then you can just plug in the MIDI however you want. So it's not quite a dummy clip because the live compressor cannot receive from MIDI. So you'd either need a third-party plugin that receives MIDI, which there's tons of them out there now, or you use a ghost kick, which is just a muted kick. It doesn't even need to be a kick. It can be literally any sound. I know some people who will just have like a little tiny click. So it's a really fast amount of signal going in to trigger the compressor. Yeah, there's not going to be a way to do it with just MIDI. It's not off the top of my head. Let me think about it. If you're tied to using the live compressor, there's not going to be a way to do it with just MIDI because it only receives audio. Yeah, so when you like take a look at the sidechain input here, it literally just says audio from, and so it won't receive from a MIDI track essentially. Yeah, most third-party plugin compressors these days have MIDI inputs. So there's your two options: either ghost kick or pick a third-party plugin, and that'll do it. Yeah, Isaac, you always click all the arrows. Always see what's hiding in there because you never know. But yeah, that's a good question. Ghost kicks, really handy to have around, especially if you're doing a lot of like house music, a lot of stuff that's like pretty heavy on the sidechains. So the question was, is there a way to copy automation and invert it on another track? So you can definitely copy it. Copying, you just copy it from one place to another. Inverting it, though, I mean, just kind of like if we had like something like this, and you just want to flip it upside down. That's a great question. Good job, Nightbot. You finally did something good. You're stumping me with this inversion thing here, because I don't think I've ever actually tried to invert some automation. Can you just do it? Can you just do this? Oh yeah, that totally works. It's kind of a pain, but yeah, you can just do that. Boom, there it is. So when you have your automation, you can do this in both session view and arrangement view. So there's the little box right here. There's the box at the top, and there's a box at the bottom. You take this one, move it all the way to the top, and take this one, move it all the way to the bottom. Boom, inverted. And then over here would be the same thing. So if we had something like this, take this, drag it to the bottom, take this guy, drag it to the top. Boom, inverted automation. I've never honestly tried that before. Yeah, these little arrows are super fun. You can like do things like scale upwards. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with automation these days. I always like it when somebody throws me a curveball like that. I'm like, how do you invert automation? I'm like, I've literally never tried to invert automation before in my life, but I'm sure there's a way to do it. And turns out there is. Sweet. So we got a bunch of people here, which is great. Good to see everybody. Thanks for joining me on the new streaming day. Hopefully this day and time works for you guys. But just a little shout out reminder that the Friday feedback stream is being moved to Wednesday. So if you got some new tracks for me, I'm going to be taking a look at them on Wednesday. There's also going to be a bonus Tuesday stream to Patreon subscribers. So if you want to support the channel and help me out and you just can't get enough of me, I'm doing Tuesday Patreon streams. So you can check out the Patreon page that I think is hopefully linked below. But yeah, tomorrow's going to be the first Patreon only stream. Nice after party. Bring me all the questions. Alex, that's a fantastic question. So he's asking about the 50 song challenge. How am I planning on staying creative and not being repetitive by the time I get to number 50? That's honestly not something I'm super nervous about. I feel like, if you watch the workflow video where I was talking about kind of like the different stages and like, this is what I'm gonna be doing on Mondays, this is what I'm doing on Tuesdays, this is what I'm doing on Wednesdays and all that kind of stuff. Part of what I mentioned for the pre-production stage of the workflow is reference tracks and inspiration. And I think for me, I get really inspired when I listen to a lot of different music. And so if I listen too much of one genre, I feel like my music gets really boring. But if I am listening to different things, if I'm listening to some like old school dub music and some classical music, I'm listening to some like Middle Eastern, experimental music or like just different combinations of things, that gets me excited to try new things. So I think part of my pre-production phase is going to be going to my Spotify, going to all the albums I've been listening to for years and just listening to a lot of things and just feeling like, okay, this is something new that I want to try, this is something different that I want to try. But generally for me, that's not as big of an issue. I like to try new things with my music and try experiment and kind of see what I can do. The harder thing for me is the deadline. It's just by Saturday or Sunday having something that's ready to go and not stressing out about it, and just meeting that deadline and meeting the high level of quality expectation that I have for myself. That's going to be the hardest part, I think. But I think for staying creative and not repeating myself, it's going to be a lot of like, this week's going to be ambient track, and next week is going to be a like super heavy bass track, and then next week is going to be, I don't know, I'm just going to like whatever I'm feeling that week is what it's going to be about. And I think I'm just going to try to be honest with where I'm at and just try to be authentic with the kind of, whatever it is I'm into at that particular week. The other thing I'm actually been doing, and I'm going to be making a video about this probably as it gets closer to the time, is a spreadsheet. Usually when I'm preparing for like an album or something like that, I'll write a whole bunch of songs and then I'll make a spreadsheet where I list all the songs and everything I'm working on, because I'll have a bunch of like half-started ideas and I'll have a bunch of like things that are almost done, and it helps me to be able to see everything in a spreadsheet and kind of know like, okay, this is the tempo of each song, this is what key each song is in, this is how far it is along, these are what the inspirations are, just to kind of keep everything organized. So a spreadsheet's gonna be really helpful for me, just being like, hey, I've been writing a lot of stuff in the like 80 to 95 BPM range. Next week I'm gonna do something that's gonna be either way slower or way faster, or just having a chart of everything I'm working on as a way to kind of be like, okay, I've been writing in F minor a lot. I'm gonna write in, G harmonic minor or something. Alex, not necessarily trying to like pick a new genre and conquer it in a whole 2 days, but just allowing myself to be influenced by everything I'm listening to. And a lot of times I'll hear a beat in like a West African, house song, and be like, oh, that's like a cool, interesting kick drum rhythm. And like, maybe I'll try that kick drum rhythm, but like, I'm not trying to master everything about that genre, but I'm trying to like, oh, I heard this new thing that I'm really excited about. It's like, I want to see what I can do with it. But yeah, definitely not trying to conquer a brand new genre every single week for the entire year, but more of just like allowing myself to be influenced by things and drawing upon those influences. Martin, that's a fantastic question. So Martin's asking about how much I would charge for mixing, if that's something that I offered. Usually I don't offer mixing as a service, although I'm getting married soon, so some more money probably wouldn't be a bad thing to have in my bank account. Generally, if I'm going to be doing mixing, I'm going to charge hourly. And if I'm doing mastering, it's just flat fee. Mastering, it's going to be around $50 per track, because I feel like my workflow with mastering is pretty streamlined, and I can get that done pretty good, and I kind of know what I'm looking for. Mixing is, like I said, it's going to be an hourly rate. I haven't been doing a lot of mixing for other people recently because I've been just doing teaching stuff. And I think it would depend a lot on the artist and like how polished the track was when they got it to me. I think if it's something where I'm just going to do a little bit of tweaks here, and it might only take me 5 or 6 hours, then I would probably take something on like that. But if somebody brings me a track and it's just like super raw and needs a lot of love, I probably don't have time for that right now. But it'd be an hourly rate, depending on how busy I am and what I'm working on, but probably in the like $30 to $40 an hour kind of thing. But that's just me personally. Hey, Marcus, thanks for popping by, and I'll see you again hopefully real soon. Sweet. What else you got? More questions? Feed me those questions. So after party, you talking about like private production assistant sessions? You mean kind of coming in and doing like track doctor kind of stuff, where like coming in and somebody's like, here's my track, how do I make it better? And then kind of going in and working through them on stuff. That would I probably, if that's what you're talking about, I'd probably just charge the same I do for like my private lessons, which is going to be in the like 50 an hour kind of range. Speaking of which, if you guys want private lessons, hit me up on go to the Catalyze website. That's one of the things I offer that I always forget to promote on the YouTube channel. Yeah, I'd probably just do the same rate that I do for like a private lesson kind of thing. But that's something actually, like a lot of my private lessons, if I've worked with somebody for a while and they've kind of, we've been working together and they kind of got a pretty good understanding of what it is they're doing, that's usually what our private lessons kind of evolve into. Whereas like they bring their new track and we kind of workshop it together and kind of figure out where they're going with it and kind of what they want to do with it, what their vision is, how to get there. So that's what a lot of my more kind of advanced level private lessons end up revolving around for the most part. All right, get rid of that guy. Sweet. What else you guys got? Questions for me? What's been going through your head? Ooh, Alex, that's a fantastic question. So he's asking if you save a template with samples in it, where are the samples stored? So when you save a template, it gets saved in your user library. So your user library is right here. And this folder actually just is a folder that lives on your computer. And check out, this is what's interesting about your user library. Your user library is a project folder. You notice the icon here? This is the same kind of icon that your projects live in. And then in here is going to be all your user library, including your templates right here. So if I'm not mistaken, my templates, if any of them have samples in there, those samples end up getting saved in the samples folder right here, in whichever folder they end up being in, either imported or processed or something like that. Probably in imported. Yeah, so that's what they'd be in imported. So they all get saved in one place in the user library in the samples folder right here. So if you want to move them or delete them or something like that, that's where you'd find them. I don't think they get organized by which template they live in. So like here's a bunch of them. They're all just in one big folder together. Like that. If you wanted to find specifically the samples for that particular template, you would have to go up into Manage Files and then Manage Project. And then you can see where those files live. It'd be right here. And show you which files they are, where they live, and then boom, there they are. Yeah, so Martin, if somebody is subscribed to Patreon and they're at the higher tier or whatever, part of what they're getting is those exclusive streams and things like that. So we could figure something out. We could like maybe like on stream talk about a song you're working on or something like that. I have no idea what I kind of have an idea what the streams are going to be, but a lot of those streams are going to be dictated by whatever people in the Patreon want to be doing. So if you want some like mixed feedback or whatever, we can do some in-depth stuff in there. So I'm sure we can work something out. Hey, Reinhardt, how are you doing? Is it possible to lock parameters? For instance, setting up a live performance template and I can't afford that my MIDI controllers glitch out and change parameters. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Martin. I appreciate that quite a bit. That's awesome. So Reinhardt, so you are in a situation where you have a live performance template and you have things that are MIDI mapped, but you want to lock them so they don't change. I think it depends a lot on how your MIDI controller is controlling live. So it depends if you're using like the push or something like that, where it's all auto mapped, or are you just using Command M for the MIDI mapping and then mapping things there. If you are MIDI mapping things and you want things to be locked sometimes, but not locked other times, that's going to be a tall order. I'm going to think about that. Using both. Okay. But you're in the situation where you want, sometimes you want to be able to turn in control and you want other times for it just to be turned off in terms of MIDI mappings. That's going to be really interesting. Because if it's a situation where you just always want to be turned off, you just don't MIDI map it or you un-MIDI map it. One thing you could do if you're in a situation where you're using the auto mapping, so you're using auto mapping here on something like the push, if you MIDI map it, so if you MIDI, say it's this, sorry, they're like leaf blowing outside right now, and I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's very loud. If you have this panning control and you want your MIDI controller to not control it, you want to turn off this MIDI mapping in your auto mapping. One of the ways you can do that is by MIDI mapping it on top of it. So if you MIDI map this to like a different control, if it gets getting conflicting messages between the MIDI mapping and the auto mapping, it will prioritize the MIDI mapping and it won't do the auto mapping. So that would be one creative way to do it. If you want to get really just sample them pulling leaves outside. If you want to get really into it, I think you kind of have two options. I think number one is if there's a MIDI editing software for your MIDI controller, which most MIDI controllers do, go in there and then turn off some of your controls or change them to be something totally different, and that way they don't get mapped to anything. If there's not a MIDI mapping software and you are somebody who knows how to do a little coding, what you can do is you can actually open up and customize your MIDI remote scripts. I don't remember exactly how to do all this, but we're going to go in here. We're going to show package contents. We're going to go on this and believe it's under app resources. MIDI remote scripts. There they are. Here's our MIDI remote scripts. We can open these up. So say it's, for example, for the APC 40 Mark II. We can open this up and go in here. These are a bunch of Python scripts. And you can actually open these up. Oh, it's not going to let me open up. You can open up with something that can open up Python scripts, and you can customize the MIDI mappings. It's a little tricky because you can break them, and that's not good. But and you need to know a little bit of coding, but you can go in here and actually customize the MIDI scripts so that certain things in your auto-mapped controller are no longer mapped. So that's a more complicated way to deal with it. I think I need to know a little bit more about your setup and exactly what's controlling what, like which controllers are you using and how are you controlling them. But there's not going to be a real simple, like you go in here and you just turn this off. You're going to have to get creative with either a combination of MIDI mapping plus auto mapping or editing SL Mark III. So, okay, so you have like a control on the SL Mark III and it's just like, it's sending ghost MIDI messages where it's moving up and down and you just don't want it to do anything. Yeah, you could totally go in here. Find the, oh, that's a bunch of Novation stuff. Yeah, the SL Mark III. You can go in here and then like customize this. Keep in mind, if you don't know any Python coding, find somebody who does, and then it's real easy. They can figure this out and no problem, and just go in here and be like, whatever the thing is that's broken, whatever the MIDI message that's sending the message is that it's not supposed to, they can go in here and just like literally like delete it out of there. That would be my fancy solution for it. Other than that, I would need to kind of take a look at what you're doing and how it's set up. You guys are coming at me with some really great questions today. And if you are enjoying the stream, feel free to hit that like button, subscribe. I'm assuming most of you guys are already subscribed, but hit the like button. Let YouTube know that you love me. That's really, really helpful. But yeah, I had an also Novation controller, the launch control, and it was sending ghost MIDI messages all the time, and I just stopped using it because it was kind of pain. Some of those cheap MIDI controllers really just kind of fall apart at the slightest bit of resistance. All right, who else has got some questions for me? Well, they finally stopped leaf blowing. That's great. It feels so quiet in here now. Yeah, I mean, I think the other way to deal with it, Reinhardt, would be to like build your template so that whatever is sending the MIDI messages that shouldn't is just like on a track where there's nothing there, and it's kind of annoying because you'll just have an empty dead track in the middle of your setup, but it would prevent it from doing things that it wouldn't. Come on, Nightbot, where are you at? Good job, Nightbot. Is there not a boot mode to disable ghost note activity? Emo, could you explain that question a little bit more? Oh, so is there not a way to boot up live so that ghost notes from a MIDI controller don't get sent through? Is that what you're asking? If there is, I am not aware of it. But I can take a look into that. Oh, that would probably depend on the controller. Yeah, like sometimes I get ghost notes on the push, and if you hit the user button or you enter user mode on the push, you can adjust the sensitivity of the pads, and then if they're too sensitive, they'll accidentally trigger notes, and then you just decrease the sensitivity, and then it totally fixes it. All right, Alex is asking, can you set? Oh, God damn it! Why are these spammers here? Get rid of them. Can you set up delays so it will create a rhythm delay by only triggering a kick once, like Jersey Club kind of rhythm? Yeah, we can try that out. Let's actually, we got this ghost kick here. Let's delete that. And toss in one kick. Put this in one-shot mode. let's get rid of that stuff. Cool. So here, you just got a kick. And you want to use this to create some kind of rhythm. I think I know the technique you're talking about, but we can try it out and kind of see. So if I wanted to take this, we could use something like a delay. And the key part of this is the feedback control. This is going to be a, this can control how many kicks we're going to get after the fact. So at 0% feedback, we're going to hear 2 kicks. We're going to hear the original kick and then the one after. Like that, right? Yeah, Reinhardt, thanks for popping by. Whereas if I turn up more feedback, we're going to get more kicks. Like that. The dry wet, we probably want to keep at 50%. The dry wet controls the volume between the original kick and the delays. So if I do something like this, the original kick is going to be louder than the delays. If I do something like this, the delays are going to be louder than the original kick. So probably keep this around 50-50. Feedback, you can keep whatever you want. And then if you want to create some like cool syncopated rhythms, these timings here are in 16th notes. So this is 1 16th note, 2 16th notes, so an 8th note. And we got some like triplet timings, quarter notes, half a bar, bar. So if you want to do some kind of like cool syncopated rhythm with this, we could have a really high feedback on like a 3 or a 5. Or we could do like a 3. We can also just put on infinite delay. And then it'll just go forever. We can also put this on like ping pong mode, which is going to bounce it back and forth left and right. Which actually sounds pretty dope. So I'm assuming this is kind of what you're talking about, just using like one single kick and then just kind of bouncing it around. We can also do really fun things like have one be a 3 and one be a 5. Or like one be a... I'm not quite sure if that's what you're talking about or not, but I think it's a fun way to kind of create cool different rhythms, and we can like change them over time. The mode is going to change how it changes time. So if you don't change the timings here, these 3 modes don't matter. But if you say switch, we'll do this all together. If I switch the timing, it'll, in this case, it'll just fade from one to the other. Or if you do repitch, it'll change the pitch as you change the timing. So it'll get lower pitch as you go to slower timings, and then a higher pitch as you go to higher timings. Which is super fun for like cool W effects too. Let's do something like this. Yeah, you can add a little alpha there. There's lots of fun stuff you can do in here. And then you can do basically the same thing, but you can do it even more complicated with the echo. Yeah, for getting different kind of rhythms, I would literally just like, I mean, it's mostly going to be like triplets and things like that. And then being able to switch. If you're just going to be doing a like different rhythm, like I'm kind of wondering what would be the point of making a rhythm with the delay as opposed to just like doing a different kind of kick rhythm to make that pattern. Or maybe I'm not understanding the question fully. me reread the question again, make sure I know what's going on. Yeah, because if I'm gonna do a more complicated rhythm, like I could do it with the delay and keep changing the time to make it bounce around to different timings. But I think I'd rather just write in MIDI to set up the timings to be whatever I wanted. And then potentially adding just delay on top of it just to bounce it around. Does that make sense? Oh, so you want to have, I guess I'm still not quite sure I understand. So you want to have a situation where you could have a vocal sample or something like that, and have the delay on the vocal sample be the like Jersey club rhythm, and then you play a beat underneath it that matches the timing of the delay. Or you, yeah, I guess that's still not quite understanding. Are you talking about just like having a clip of the Jersey club rhythm that you can just like trigger whenever you want? Oh, it's not enough. Yeah, I feel like I'm still not quite understanding. While we are trying to figure this out, if anybody has any questions about anything related to music production, feel free to let me know in the chat. That's kind of what we're here for today. Just hanging out and kind of talking about whatever you guys are into. So you want to be able to essentially make a rhythm. You make your 4 on the floor, you make your clave rhythm just once, and then trigger a voice command for the specific rhythm, and then with just the voice command. I guess you're used to the voice command, like you want to be able to just like talk into your computer and have it trigger a clip for you. Because if that's the case, I don't know how to do that. But if you want to be able to like, okay, you build your 4 on the floor. We got our 4 on the floor. So you want to have one sample in a simpler, and then the rest of the rhythm is from your voice. Man, Alex, I really apologize. I'm like just not understanding the hypothetical situation you're in here. So you want to have open serum contact just with your voice. There might be some functionality in like OS X potentially where you could do that. Or I have not. Where you could go into the like the accessibility. Is there voice commands in here? I don't actually know. voice control. Yeah, I've literally never tried this before, but I'm assuming you could use the voice control options in the accessibility, make a command. There's basic stuff. Can you add just MIDI messages? When you say, when using, yeah, now I want to know how to do this because it actually seems kind of cool. Like if you say something when you're using, is Ableton Live not even an option? Whatever, when you say the thing, and then you go in here and then run workflow, and then you could run like an automator that sends MIDI messages that would open up your plugins or whatever. I don't know. I think, to me, it seems like if I'm understanding what you're asking, it's possible, but I have never tried to do that. But I might try just so I can be cool. And when I walk into the studio, I can just say open live, and then it just opens live, and then boom, there's my template. So I may try that out, but I'm not making any promises that it can open up Serum and Contact for you. But it might be able to like open up your template that has Serum and Contact ready to go. Okay, yeah, message me because I still want to figure out what's going on here, about just being able to like, yeah, you make your rhythm or whatever, but then you're using voice commands to trigger it or something. Not sure. But yeah, definitely message me because I'm curious to hear what your goals are and what you're looking to do, because it sounds cool, whatever it is. So we are about approaching the end of stream time for me. I really appreciate you guys kind of popping by and showing up on the new stream time on Monday. Alex, you can either email me, Catalyze Music Academy at Gmail, or you can try and message me on Instagram on either Catalyze Academy on Instagram or Xenotope, which is my artist name on Instagram. I do not check my Instagram messages that much though, so it might take me a minute to get back to you if you do hit me up on Instagram. Or you can join the Discord. That's probably a super easy way to get a hold of me. You can message me through the Catalyze Discord, and that's linked below, I believe. Whichever way works best for you. Just not Facebook, because I don't check Facebook. But yeah, this is the first Monday stream. It's been great. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you guys like the new stream time. Hopefully it's working for you. If you're a Patreon person, I will see you tomorrow for the first Patreon only stream. If you are not a Patreon member, you probably should be. If not, I will see you on Wednesday for the Friday, or not Friday. I'm so used to saying Friday feedback stream. See you on Wednesday for a Wednesday feedback stream. Whip Wednesdays is what I'm going to tentatively call it for now. So if you have a track that you're working on and you would like to share and get some feedback, I'll see you on Wednesdays. And then, yeah, that's kind of the idea. Cool. Yeah, Alex, I'll check the Catalyze Instagram. So yeah, so have a great week. Make some music. I will see you guys real soon. But thanks for popping by, and I'll see you later.